Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episode is Season 4, Episode 2, or Episode 62 overall, The Lost Mattress and Krabs vs. Plankton, both of which originally aired on Nickelodeon on May 13th, 2005. And Season 4 is out. It's on its way, still getting pumped out. We're 2 episodes in, and already things are a bit different, but things are still good. It's not classic, but it's still good in its own way. So, what do these next 2 episodes offer? People wondered in 2005. Well, a lot of injuries. The Lost Mattress was written by Mike Bell and Tim Hill, the third episode in a row to only have 2 major writing credits. And I guess that's a big reason why Season 4 already felt quite different from the first 3, is because most episodes in the first 3 seasons had 3 or 4 writers, usually 3. It was kind of unusual to have 2 writers for an episode, and it still is today now that they've gone down to 1. So that gives these early Season 4 episodes this odd sense of, 2 people figuring a story out and helping each other write it, which I really dig, but maybe it doesn't feel quite as structured as the 3 writer episodes here and later in Season 4, but these are decent writers. Tim Hill actually returned to the series, having not been a writer since Jellyfishing way back in early Season 1. He was one of the developmental doilies, and he returned for a few episodes in Season 4 and 5 before heading off again, and I do like his writing style, but it is kind of obvious that he didn't watch the show grow and evolve throughout those first 3 seasons, but he is keeping the spirit alive in some way, just making sure that there's a smidge of that Season 1 in Season 4 so that things can possibly get back on track. But they're back on track in a different way, as we see throughout The Lost Mattress. Like, there are a few adjustments to the show made here that'll be made throughout the rest of Season 4. Like, a lot of these early Season 4 episodes are like that. They just gradually put the show back in a place where it can be produced regularly throughout the year, because the production on these episodes was actually pretty spread out. Like, these first 2 episodes, from Fear of a Krabby Patty up to Krabs vs. Plankton, were produced in late 2004. Then the following 6 were made in 2005, and then the rest was 2006. So it was a pretty slow start production-wise, but a slow start is still a start. And one of the big adjustments made in this episode is that not only is this the first appearance of Patrick in Season 4, and he is mostly normal here, but this is the first post-movie episode to feature noticeable way new music for the show. Here it's Sponge Chase, which would later be adjusted down into a Happy Sponge Chase vibes remix of itself, which they use for the rest of the show. And I've seen some mixed opinions on the post-movie SpongeBob soundtrack, specifically what they use as background music. I'd recommend checking out a video by Greg Cubed about how SpongeBob's musical identity changed across Season 4, how they went from that very varied, diegetic, multi-genre soundtrack vibe of the first 3 seasons into using very samey, childish, and repetitive soundtracks to reflect the evolving tone of the show. And it is something that you gradually notice across these early post-movie episodes and seasons. That is a big factor in how the show's tone and how you feel about it is changing. But honestly, for me, I do not mind some of them. Like, Sponge Chase is a cool little ditty, but there are a couple as it goes on that get really obnoxious and overplayed, and I do really miss the soundtrack vibe of the first 3 seasons when you compare it to what they had by Season 6. But I think that the biggest noticeable change in the Lost Mattress that makes you really go, okay, this is a new writing staff now, is how the characters behave. Like, things are very noticeably adjusting, and they're like moving out of their pre-movie characterizations, but only a little bit. Like, they're still presented the same way, but there are things that you see SpongeBob or Squidward do that are like, I don't know. Like, would Steve have put that in? Would he have let them do that joke? Would that be a bit over the top? And I don't really want to be the guy who knows exactly what Steve would have wanted, but there are certainly things about SpongeBob and Squidward in this episode and throughout the rest of season 4 that we hadn't really seen them do before that might be a little bit, you know, uh, pushing the pushing to the brink of what we know about these characters and how they're depicted, like SpongeBob drawing a get well soon card in crayon. Like, I don't know, I think especially after a movie where he comes to terms with how he isn't really a kid or a grown-up. He's a grown-up that acts like a kid, and that's sort of a nice empowering message to kids. I don't know how I feel about him so soon after just doing something a 3-year-old would do, and as the season goes on, you start seeing him like playing with stuffed animals and stuff, and yeah, it is definitely a different take on the character that we're seeing starting to form now that things have settled down. We've had a super zany episode in Fear of a Krabby Patty and sort of a backstory episode in Shell of a Man. The Lost Mattress really feels like things are back on track in terms of like what stories we're telling, and it really does feel different. Like, it's trying to be season 3, but there are just little differences and changes, and the animation isn't really one of them in this episode. Like, it looks honestly pretty close to season 3 in terms of like the backgrounds and the character animation. This is one of the, more classic looking season 4 episodes. Like, that's another thing about season 4 that constantly changes. Sometimes they go back to something resembling the old style, sometimes they're going forward with the post-movie look. And that's another thing I really like about season 4 in terms of its art direction. It just doesn't know what it wants to be, and it's constantly surprising you. This is a case where inconsistency actually does kind of help in the end. Although a few animation errors sneaking in, I don't know really. But those animation errors in SpongeBob, even in this era, are so infrequent and minor that you only see them if you're seeking them. And something that's kind of gone overlooked about how characters evolved in the post-movie era is Squidward's characterization. Like, I'm really not sure about the scene where he flat out, like, threatens to murder SpongeBob in a hospital of all places. Like, I guess it's a teeny bit in character, but I don't know if he would, like, go that far usually. But otherwise, I think Squidward is alright in this episode. He's not my favorite character in this episode. That might be Patrick, who's come back swinging, honestly. But yeah, Squidward is sort of just doing what they were used to doing before. Like, one of his last major roles in the pre-movie era was the camping episode, where he was just mauled by a sea bear for, like, the last third. So that's what they're doing in this episode, just having him get mauled by a guard worm, getting him, like, back to how we usually know him too, because he didn't really do much in the first 2 episodes of the season. And I do really like the guard worm. I like how, like actual dogs, they can be either very threatening when they're on the job or really nice and cute when you befriend them. Fun fact, I'm a dog person. One thing I really like about the Lost Mattress is just how it has a little bit of satire in it about hospitals. Not a lot, but it's got this running gag of the hospital just gradually caring less and less about Mr. Krabs, who's in a coma, until they just kick him out of the building because apparently he might not have the money to afford his hospital bed. And that is such a harsh dig at the American healthcare system, which the more I learn about American healthcare, the less I know how you guys are still alive. But an odd thing about Mr. Krabs in this episode is that this episode confirms that he's never heard of what a bank is, possibly because he did refer to a bank in Krabbyland, but he could have been referring to like a figurative bank there. But then again, well, this is not a joke that you can like debate for hours and hours, but on the other hand, he could have just been saying no to Squidward's really well-drawn face because he like was going through a sort of attack as he went into that coma. Either way, they stuck with this idea that Mr. Krabs hardly even knows or cares about banks because they later do an episode where he gets his first bank account and gets stuck in the safe. And I do think that it's totally in character for Mr. Krabs to sleep on top of all of his banknotes. He just loves them so much. But overall, I think that The Lost Mattress is fine. I think it's fine enough to be probably the most inconspicuous episode of early season 4. But it's not bad or anything. It's just got a few little things that are like, well, that's new. That's different. But Krabs vs. Plankton, I really like this one. This one was written by Tim Hill, Mike Mitchell, and Vincent Waller. Finally, we've got a trio working on an episode. Tim Hill, again, hasn't really been keeping up with SpongeBob since very early season 1. Vincent Waller is the new technical director, so he should know how to put together an episode. And Mike Mitchell, brand new to the show, first new writer they got, I think, after Mike Bell, who was technically around for live action skits and stuff. But Mike Mitchell, first new staff writer that they got on, but he only wrote 2 episodes in his entire time on SpongeBob. This and Friend or Foe, which was also written alongside Tim Hill. And Mike Mitchell, I don't really know about... Well, I do know a lot about where he went in the industry after this, but I don't really know how he got his start, but he must have been good friends with Tim because he then went on to direct a lot of DreamWorks movies like Shrek Forever After, and his last commitment to SpongeBob was directing the live-action sequences for the second SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, so he came back for the end of this era, which I think is kind of sweet. But this is a really good lore-themed episode. You know, in a lot of cartoons, they do these sorts of plot lines where there's a court hearing and juries and the trial makes no sense whatsoever because, I don't know, maybe the writer just got jury duty one day and had a bad experience and decided to project it into an episode. That's what a lot of these lore episodes feel like. And sometimes the jokes really work, and this is one of those cases where the jokes really do work. It's funny because it somewhat makes sense. Even though I haven't ever clicked on it, I have seen that video with the lawyer pop up where he's laughing at the SpongeBob episode. I haven't really seen it because I really do not care about American law or politics or anything like that, but SpongeBob mostly stays evergreen with this sort of thing. It just doesn't really make it too serious. It is just a total farce, and that's what I like to see in SpongeBob, just taking these things and making them sillier and funnier. And I do really like this subversion that they did with Mr. Bottomfeeder here. Not only just designing a new lawyer for the show that I really wish could have been in more episodes. He seems interesting enough to work in a regular basis, but then they just sort of leave him on the floor to undermine just how dangerous SpongeBob's mopping is. It's really funny. And like it adds an extra complication to the matter. But I do really like his name, Bottom Feeder, because, well, that's the ultimate insult to lawyers, ain't it? But I can't help but think that maybe a lot of this episode is SpongeBob's fault just for not watching where he's mopping in a open kitchen and then like a place where someone might slip. But you know, it's his naivete making him do that, and that's often a part of his character. And I do really like that bit where SpongeBob's like, "Where do I get the clothes?" And we never see Bottom Feeder again, let alone clothed. And like this is the first episode of season 4 to really have Mr. Krabs and Plankton interacting for an extended period of time. The first time we've really seen it in a while because we didn't really get much of them like interacting with the movie. It was pretty one-sided there. Last time was the like big ultimate climax to the sort of Krabs versus Plankton episode with Plankton's army towards the end of season 3, but now we've got it again, and this is also where they start to play into like adding slash subtracting to the characterizations and dynamics on the show, because up until this point it hasn't really been that implied that Mr. Krabs might just be a total bully to Plankton, but there are scenes in this episode where he really just does get under Plankton's skin, and it's like, no wonder Plankton has a bone to pick with this guy. But what works about it here is that there is a use to it in the story. You've got Plankton using it as ammunition against Mr. Krabs in this very emotional court case. And I do really like Plankton throughout this episode. His agonizing wake from bed and his manipulative plea for emotion in a courtroom. It really is totally like Mr. Lawrence just knows this character inside and out at this point. Plankton is probably one of the least changed characters after season 3, and you've always got moments like this to look out for where you play with your expectations for Plankton and what he can do, and that makes for a good villain. I really like how he's handled in this episode. Like, I do really like him saying things like Graham and implying that he wants to be a marathon runner. Like, it's just things that we never would have thought about with Plankton before. But it's for the joke. It's really funny. And I do really like this jury of random, but they're starting to become iconic background fish. It really works. And I also do really like that turn of the wheelchair that Plankton's in, even though it's a little too big for him. I think the biggest, like, interesting thing about Krabs versus Plankton to me, as someone who likes to watch SpongeBob's design change throughout these early post-movie seasons to see where and when exactly it went wrong, is that in this episode especially, they really like giving SpongeBob these big black eyebrows on the top of his head in between like his two middle waves on the top of his sponge head. And I do really like that design choice, but they use it way too much in Krabs vs. Plankton. They use it far less frequently in a lot of other season 4 episodes, and you even see it quite a few times in season 3 in the movie. And I don't know, I think that for a few emotions it can work, but here it's a bit overused, and it starts to change his design a little bit. Like, we complain a lot about his cheeks, but imagine if a big indicator of you watching a post-movie episode is if SpongeBob has these eyebrows that just kind of overcomplicate the top of his head. But yeah, that's really all I can say about this episode in terms of like what the characters are like. I think that the jokes are what make this episode so cool, as well as the story. Like, the story is like one of these classic lore episodes, but It really is funny how they take comedy into this situation, like this weird little like interrogation of the mop, which is more intense than it needs to be. I do really like this running gag of SpongeBob being on the case but not being able to open the case, and then it just like opens without warning. That's good writing. I really don't want to keep on saying like that's a good joke, this is how the joke is written, that's why it's good. But with a lot of these episodes in the first 4 seasons that are just so dang funny, I just have to point out when a joke is quite excellent. And another really cool thing about this episode's story is that as much as it shows the differences between Mr. Krabs and Plankton, there are 2 scenes that I really like that show that they're both the same and that they're one-track minded. They both particularly love one thing. Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob uses money to prove that he is a great boss, but then he just like tries to save the already blended money. And then it's the same with Plankton here with the Krabby Patty. I do really like that parallel. And I really like how this is how they get Plankton to crack. It feels very true to his character in episodes like Fun, where, you know, bring him close to a Krabby Patty and he just goes completely nuts. He wants to run away with it. But then he can't because, well, it completely blows his case. Like the Lost Mattress, I think there are a few, like, American things in this episode that might fly over my head because I just don't really know or care that much about these issues, but I do kind of find it interesting that SpongeBob tried to tackle these issues in a funny and somewhat satirical way, and you don't often associate, like, satire with SpongeBob, so, you know, it's kind of interesting that they tried to go for this, and I think that combining these 2 episodes for the second half hour of season 4 was a clever idea. And that was The Lost Mattress and Krabs vs. Plankton. Last time I asked who your preferred showrunner would have been, and you all gave a lot of really interesting answers. Dashiell said that, I gotta say, I don't know if I wanted someone else to run season 4 and 5 of SpongeBob. I think Paul and Tibbet did a pretty good job, even though there were some really bad episodes, a lot of them were still really good. Now, season 6 through 8, I probably would have liked to have someone else run SpongeBob. Snake Man says Sherm Cohen or Derek Drymon, I think. Bryce Vaughan, I think Derek Drymon, Tim Hill, or Sherm Cohen. And Hillenberg, instead of leaving the show entirely, could have stayed on board as creative consultant after stepping down from his showrunner position. Yeah, that is something that I do really wish would have happened if he stayed a creative consultant, but I totally get it if he wanted to, like, leave the spotlight. Mewmaster also suggests Derek Drymon or Sherm Cohen. Those are the 2 most common answers, Derek Drymon and Sherm Cohen. And I really got to agree, if Derek Drymon was going to go, Sherm probably should have stuck up, even if I do think that Paul Tibbet had some really great episodes under his belt. Sparkling with Nights, Jay Linder, Angry Jack, Sherm Cohen, Derek Drymon, or Meriwether Williams. Now, my question time for you next week is, what would you sue a SpongeBob character for? Every character has committed a lot of crimes over the years, so what would you take the most offense to, and what would you want to get some comeuppance for? Let me know, and next week, Skill Crane and Good Neighbors turn 18, but I'm not going to cover those. I'm going to cover Have You Seen the Snail, because that comes next. Goodbye for now.